Well, today was quite the wild day for the economy. I mean, there's so many things to talk about. I guess I'll start with President Trump and the oil markets. President Trump decided to inject himself into the recent plummet, the crash in oil prices. Now, of course, those of you who haven't been following the oil situation, I talked about it briefly, some time ago. Feels like weeks ago. I think it was only days ago. But there is essentially a price war between the Saudis and the Russians. And they are both, producing lots and lots of oil and driving the price down. I think the price bottomed somewhere around like $7. In which, per barrel of oil, which I mean, to me sounds amazing because I personally can run my vehicle on crude oil, so I wish I had access to buy actual barrels of oil, but I don't, sadly. Certainly not at that price. But anyway, the point is that oil has been, in a tailspin for some time now, and this was one of the initial factors which has now been greatly overshadowed by the Wu flu, which started this current big crash that we're in right now. A lot of people were concerned on the credit side about this decline in oil prices, because what it means is that pretty much every North American oil company, or at least every oil company that is operating in North America, where they're getting all their oil from there, would go bankrupt because their costs to produce each barrel of oil is well above the price that oil is currently trading at, meaning that they are losing money on every barrel of oil. These companies, which are heavily levered, way over levered, like pretty much everyone on Wall Street, they are insolvent if oil remains at this price. And so miraculously, President Trump came out and told everyone that he had just talked to his great friend Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and that he had apparently come to some agreement with Mr. Putin of Russia that they were going to, reduce the amount of oil that they were producing every day. And so this, wonderfully, according to Trump, is going to push up the price of oil, because that's just going to help everybody. Now, of course, this is very funny to hear coming from Trump, because normally when the price of oil goes down, he's very happy. And that's one thing that I have to say, economically speaking, that Trump has been very good on. He seems to have always favored low oil prices, because, of course, that helps consumers. And, because what voter doesn't want cheaper gas prices? Well, I guess Trump started to get worried about the American oil companies recently, and so now he wants higher oil prices. But he made the funny misstatement of saying, oh, this is great for everybody, when just a couple months ago in January he was saying that low oil prices were great for everybody. Now, in reality, of course, he was right in January to say that low oil prices are great for just about everybody except for a few oil companies. But those companies were heavily over-levered to begin with, and I have no interest in subsidizing their unprofitable ventures through higher oil prices. But anyway, I think I skipped over it before. The reason why it's so important, the oil price here, for the overall financial markets, for the stock market, and for the bond market, for everything, is that there is so much debt tied up, in these oil companies that, were they all to start going bankrupt, because of course, they aren't making enough money to service their debts now that they're no longer profitable because of the price of oil, well, then that could set off a financial crisis, because so much of the rest of the economy is exposed to this debt, and that would, just like with subprime mortgages back in 2008, or rather 2006 to 2008, that would spread into the rest of the economy and would lead to defaults elsewhere, and it would, because that's what happens when you have heavy financialization, is that all this stuff is interconnected. You have a very complex system that's very fragile, and so you take out one of those little Jenga blocks, and the whole tower comes crumbling down. And so stocks today, supposedly, if you listen to the folks on CNBC, rallied significantly based on the hopes that, trying to price out this risk of all the American oil companies going bankrupt. And so now, supposedly we're so much less at risk for a financial crisis, because oil is now slightly more expensive. Never mind the fact that oil is still, too cheap for these North American oil companies really to make much money. And of course, this whole thing is based off of taking Trump at his word, and he's been known to exaggerate from time to time when it comes to the facts. There's no deal and no treaty signed between Russia and Saudi Arabia. We have no real reason to believe anything's happened. It could just be that they're talking about it, and that Trump was really enthusiastic after talking to MBS, and he decided to go out there and blurt and maybe exaggerate the extent to which Saudi Arabia and Russia have come to an agreement. I'm not saying that that's the truth. All I'm saying is that we're very far away from seeing that there's going to be a significant reduction in oil production. There are many more concrete steps that would have to be taken before we get to that point. And of course, what does it matter at this point anyway? Because global demand for oil is also way down. But even if you say that, okay, well, this great increase in supply is going to be taken off the table. Well, if demand is still way up, still way down, these companies are going to have trouble, making any money, just like everyone else right now. Okay, nobody's doing well. So who cares? Let's say that none of the North American oil companies go bankrupt because they can't service their debt. Well, everybody else is going bankrupt. The restaurants are going bankrupt. The hotels are going bankrupt. You don't think that their debt is going to, has the potential to spark a financial crisis? The whole corporate bond market is a bunch of toxic waste. So all in all, nothing really changed today fundamentally. We're still in terrible shape. Yeah, so who cares about the oil companies? I mean, as it is right now, nobody can pay their mortgage if they're, unemployed. So we're going to have, a housing crisis just like in 2008 anyway. And this is just as a side effect of the Wu flu thing. Obviously, plenty of other sectors of the economy are in just as much trouble. We're already hearing rumblings from the industry that housing is in big trouble right now. And, as George Gammon pointed out in one of his recent videos, the canary in the coal mine, as far as this is concerned, is going to be the mortgage servicers, because those are the people who pay out to the mortgage-backed securities. They are essentially, your medieval taxmen, who go around, who are tasked, by the king, hey, I need X amount of tax dollars every year, and you need to give me that much money, whether the people pay you that much or not. Now, on the other hand, if people paid the taxman more than the king wanted, well, then the taxman could pocket that as his profit. And so I don't think the servicers are quite that have that quite good of a relationship, in this whole industry. I think that that it's just that they have to pay out for whatever, the actual people who are paying their mortgages. They have to pay out whatever that is, whether they pay or not, to the bondholders. And so what happens then, if too many people don't pay their mortgage, the servicer cannot cover for them. The servicer cannot pay their mortgage for them. It can't pay everybody's mortgage. Like what I was saying before on the macro scale about, you can't have bailouts if everyone goes bankrupt at the same time, because you can't give everyone a bailout. There has to be somebody who is has a surplus that they can use to bail out the other people who have a deficit. And so, what we should expect now is to start seeing mortgage servicers going belly up. Because if you want to look at just how bad, just looking at housing, how many people are going to be unable to pay their mortgage, well, let's take a look at the unemployment data. In 2008, throughout the course of the whole recession, about 8.8 million people lost their jobs. Well, in the last 2 weeks, if we take, because we also got, first-time unemployment claims today, which again, the way that works is that this is the amount of people who filed for unemployment compensation within the last week. So that's not everybody who lost their job. That's just everybody who went and applied for unemployment. And so, the first time we saw a spike because of the shutdown across the country was last week, and it was 3.2 million people. This week, that number was more than doubled. It's 6.6 million people. And so the total over these last 2 weeks, it has been 9.8 million. Okay, so in the last 2 weeks, more people have lost their jobs than in all of the 2008 recession. So you tell me, does that mean that what's going on right now is going to have a less of an impact on the housing market or a greater impact on the housing market? Now, of course, the the circumstances are not identical, because that recession actually started in the housing market, and so it was the housing market is what was actually bringing down unemployment. But in this case, unemployment, or bringing down employment back then. But now, unemployment is what will bring down the housing market. And don't forget that housing defaults tend to pancake on each other. It is it's something that is self-reinforcing. Mortgage defaults beget more defaults and more foreclosures, because as houses begin to be foreclosed on and prices begin to fall, well, the people who can still make their payments but have seen all of their equity eroded away to the point where they're underwater, meaning that they owe more on their house than it's worth, start to think to themselves, gee, why am I making payments on this house? It's not the financially smart move. It's much better just to let the bank foreclose on me and then go move out somewhere and pay rent that's much cheaper than my mortgage. And so then you start to see strategic default, in which like I said, more people just begin defaulting on their mortgages because there were other people defaulting on their mortgages. This is just a microcosm of what I've been saying for the last couple weeks, that this is a totally different country on the other side of this lockdown. Once we all come out of our houses after however many months that we end up being locked up, our economy will be fundamentally changed. I think about a place like where I live, in Florida, where housing is, one of our key industries. Our economy is built on, people whose 401ks have gone up year after year after year without ever going down, cashing in those 401ks and then coming to Florida and buying a house. If all of a sudden we see a rising stock market and or a falling stock market on the one hand, and two, a massive unemployment because of this lockdown thing, well, then when things come back and if housing prices as a result of all this drop, well, then when we come back, if there's less demand for housing here, just as a base case, there's going to be less demand for all sorts of services that are provided. Because if you think about pest control, mowing, irrigation, fertilization, roofers, exterminators, plumbing, pizza delivery, restaurants, all these things, the way that restaurants are supported is, by a lot of people living in a general area. If the population goes away, because housing, collapses, and all of a sudden there aren't all these people who own second homes who come to Florida and support all these industries, well, then, all these industries are going to fade away too. And again, this is going to have different impacts across the United States. I'm just talking about how it's impacting my area because I can think through it, because I know how my local economy works. I've been saying to folks for the last couple of years in my area that I think that, we're going to be the next Detroit after all is said and done and we have our next financial crisis. And of course, this was long before any of this virus stuff. So to end today, I'd like to give some revised thoughts on this lockdown that we're under here in Florida, because yesterday the Governor Ron DeSantis declared a lockdown after much pressure from the outside world, and the leftists going after him for weeks, saying he's way too weak. You need to declare a police state, Ron. You need to lock people in their homes. You need to send out the police and men with guns and the National Guard to round up all the COOFers and throw them in COOF camps. And so finally, he issued a stay-at-home order yesterday. And, at first I was, not very happy about that, of course, because I don't like all this police state stuff. But then, as I actually started to learn more and more of the details about this, it doesn't seem like anything really changed yesterday. It seems like it was more of a symbolic measure because, there are so many loopholes in this. And they're not really loopholes if that's how it's designed. It's not a very strong stay-at-home order, because at least everyone I know is considered an essential worker. So I don't know anybody who has had to stop working just because of, this order. And, according to this order, you're still allowed to go out and do hunting and fishing and recreational activities, which is nice. It wouldn't make sense to make people stay at home and not do recreational activities that they're doing by themselves anyway. But, it's not exactly what you think of. If the government's ordering you to stay at your home, you would think that they're putting you under house arrest. But here we seem to pretty much have our freedom intact for the most part. Of course, I still do have to have my papers in order. I do have a sheet of paper that says I'm an essential worker, so if I get stopped by a cop, I will have to do that. So it is still a police state. Okay, this is like South Africa or the Soviet Union or any other police state where you have to present your papers, or I guess in South Africa they called it a pass. So in principle, it's not good, but in practice, it doesn't seem to be that debilitating. So anyway, with that said, if you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.